All right, with that, today's panel is us. Joining us later in the show will be Anupam Manur. I hope I pronounced it correctly. He will correct me if I haven't. He's a professor of economics at the Takshila Institution. He is an expert in technology, economics, and public policy. He focuses on trade, platform economics, India's job crisis, and he is also a columnist. You will know more about him. We will be discussing the turbulence for the airline industry because of the aviation fuel crisis. Yes, and we have our area expert who has joined us. Thank you so much, Anupam, for joining us.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here again.
Yes, a pleasure. Um, I was just discussing if I've pronounced your surname correctly. It is Manur, right?
Yeah, Anupam Manur.
Right. I have done your introduction even before you came. One bit I can add is you're the managing editor of the Indian Public Policy Review. It is, and you also write a column in media outlets. And the one that has been linked today is the one that you have written for Takshila.org on turbulence ahead for the Indian airline industry. So, two quick questions, and you can tell us the context and you can do a simple explainer for our audience. One, there is an aviation fuel crisis the world over because of what is happening in Iran. That is leading to skyrocketing prices of turbine fuel, jet fuel, which is also why I believe Donald Trump has offered to bail out what's it called? Spice? What's the airline there? It'll just come to me, the low cost carrier. He said he'll save millions of jobs or thousands of jobs. It is having its impact here. Airlines asking for a bailout. And also UAE pulling out of OPEC.
Yeah.
What is the context of that? How will it impact? Now, will there be competitive price wars? So should not that logically lead to lower crude prices, or that has nothing to do with them pulling out?
Okay. I'll deal with UAE first because that's going to be the shorter segment. But generally for India, any kind of cartel breaking is good news. It's not going to come into effect tomorrow. It'll take its own kind of sweet time before we see the effects of, let's say, some form of price competition. And the way that this works is that even a 50 cents, 10 cents on a gallon difference is quite a bit because you're buying in so many millions of gallons, right? So if there is indeed even the tiniest bit of a price war between these countries, it's great for us. But let's come to the airline fuels, and I think that's far more interesting.
Sorry, I got the name wrong. It's not Spice, it's Spirit Airline,
Spirit Airline.
and also Frontier and Avilo are asking the Trump administration for 2.5 billion to cover jet fuel costs. Spirit though is saying bail us out, buy us, the government, and he is happy to buy them.
Yeah. No, I think so. This is, by the way, happened in multiple other countries, because ATF price rise is real. It's quite a bit. For example, I think the per barrel, it was about $87 at one point just before all of this war, and now it's about $260 dollars per barrel, right? So that's quite a big jump in prices in ATF. And that you can see repercussions of that throughout the airline industry around the world. But I would actually maintain that Indian airline carriers are worse off than anybody else. And that's a unique set of policy choices that are being made in India, which makes things much worse. And again, I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit. But what has essentially happened is that as it is, fuel cost obviously is quite a bit in terms of operating costs, 30 to 40% of operating costs for airlines come from fuel. Now, because of this increase, that has gone up to about 55 to 60%, which is quite a bit again. You hand that in with what's happening, in terms of the entire airline industry in India, as it is, was going through quite a bit of trouble in terms of the western corridors being shut off. Pakistan airspace was gone. Now even the West Asian airspace is gone. So that automatically adds to the cost for Indian airlines. They have to take circuitous routes and so on, right? So that makes it much more costlier for Indian airlines. And against this backdrop, what has happened is that I'm going to say something which will sound bad, but that is normal, right? There's something called the crack spread. That is the difference between, I know, that is the difference between the ATF fuel prices, which is
Hmm.
at the market, and crude oil prices. And the difference is generally for refining. Now, the crack spread around the world has gone up because, where crude oil comes from is also the place where a lot of refining happens. So the Middle East or West Asia is also where a lot of refinement happens, which is now shut off for the world. And so therefore that crack spread increases. In India, the FIA claims that the Indian Airlines, FIA is the Federation of Indian Airlines, they are claiming that the crack spread is as high as 132%. Now, I've not been able to independently verify this, but the letter that you mentioned, which they wrote to the Civil Aviation Ministry, they
Right.
claim that this is at about 132%. A part of that is, of course, because the OMCs, which is the oil marketing companies in India, are taking a bigger kind of cut of the slice, right? And we'll come to some bits of that. But that's the lay of the land.
Hmm.
The crack spread is extremely high. The ATF around the world is high. But in the next bit, if you'll allow me, I'll tell you why India is particularly badly placed in all of this.
Okay. Two quick questions. One is, there was, I mean, I remember mentioning this on Hafta a few years ago. There was a time when the cost of a air ticket from Delhi to Sri Lanka was cheaper than from Delhi to Chennai or Kerala, because domestic airlines pay a higher tax than international. Is that correct? Is that
That is correct.
And that also adds to the unique problem of domestic carriers?
Yes.
Which
So-
makes no sense. Why is that? I didn't know that.
Because international airlines, you're paying the tax internationally. I don't know. Expert will tell us. Why am I talking shit?
Yeah. So there is multiple reasons, right, for why this particular thing happens. One is generally the Indian tax structure is, as you could imagine, one of the worst in the world. It's the most extractive. It's the most rapacious that you could think of.
Yeah, we pay 18% GST on our subscriber revenue, whereas there are others in the news industry who are paying 5%. Just
Yeah,
FYI.
yeah.
Hmm.
And that is a direct consequence. I mean, I don't want to get sidetracked into all of this, but that's a direct consequence of the largesse that the Indian government wants to have in terms
Right.
of, I mean, they call it under welfare, but how much of welfare actually reaches is a different question. But the inefficiencies of the government at all aspects is what leads to the idea that they have to now extract tax from those who are willing to pay it, right? And the airline industry is no different. So we have, for example, something which is an ad valorem tax as against a flat tax rate. So around the world, in the US, for example, there's a flat X number of cents per dollar as a tax rate. Whereas in India, it's 11%. This thing. So whenever you make it as a percentage, whenever the fuel now prices go up, or automatically the tax revenue as well goes up. So it's not a flat rate, right? So if for example, let's say fuel prices go up from $45 to $90, automatically ATF price, the tax which you pay
Goes
will
up.
also double.
Right.
Whereas if it's a flat rate, it won't double.
Whereas an
It will-
international carrier is paying the flat rate to whichever country they're paying
Elsewhere.
to.
Yes,
Right. So,
yes,
so that is the
right?
reason that a domestic flight, which is a less distance, can be more expensive than an international flight, which is bizarre. And the second thing I want to ask is that
No,
so-
but that's not even the end of it.
Oh.
That's not even the end of it. So we have this particular tax rate, right? Ad valorem tax rate. But then on top of that, we have because the airline turbine fuel is not part of GST. There are state level VATs as well. And there's quite a huge difference in this as well. So, for example, in some states, Karnataka, Maharashtra, I think is at like 1 to 4%, whereas Tamil Nadu is 29%, Delhi is 25% VAT. So that sits on top of the ad valorem tax. I'm going to say one last thing, which is probably the most ridiculous policy decision, right? There's something called the import parity pricing. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but what it means, and trust me, it'll seem as absurd as when I say it. Now, India produces more ATF than it consumes, right? We export about half of it. So we produce X, we consume about 50% of it, and we export 50% of it. But that 50% that we consume, we tax it as though it was imported as a finished product. Now, generally, this doesn't make sense, right? So in up till 2002, we had something called the administered price mechanism, etc., which went away. And since then, this is how it's done. We act as if, even though it's domestically manufactured, we act as if it's imported. So we take the mean price at the Gulf states. It's called the mean of Platts Arab Gulf benchmark. Then there is a notional Gulf to India transport cost that we add on top of that, freight cost. And then we put a customs duty. A customs duty on something that is imported, that is manufactured entirely within India. And then we put a cess on that, obviously. All of this adds to about 10% to fuel costs.
Wow.
And that's not an insignificant number. And this makes no sense to me whatsoever. There's no rational basis for this.
Right. In fact, one of the recommendations I had was this Ruchir Sharma's conversation with Anant, but I'll come to that at the end of the show. Next question, Anupam, is this is something that's been just niggling, I've been thinking about, and you can explain it to us and our viewers. I remember in the pre-Lehman years, the insane years when CNBC and all these business channels every week, they would have balloons popping and striations. We've cracked 15,000, 20,000, 25,000, and it was because there was a lot of cheap money, there was liquidity sloshing in the market. I remember crude went from 60 a barrel to about 120.
Yeah.
But no one was complaining at that time, right? It was celebrated. Of course, inflation was really high. India was in double-digit growth. Those were the prime Manmohan Singh years. The stock market was going insane. Of course, then Lehman happened, September 2008. The whole world went to shit. But explain to me the difference why there was no panic. There was no, high tauba when crude had touched $120 a barrel. And I'm talking 2007-8, which is 20 years ago. We are touching 110, 115 now, and there's high tauba. What is the difference on today's, doubling from 80 to 115, and that time going from 60 to 120?
This is partially speculative in nature, but okay. I would say that what happened at that point of time was that the price rise was largely due to increased demand, and that was fueled by higher growth. So as long as you have a growth fueled kind of higher demand, which leads to higher prices, it somehow is okay. It's understood, because China was growing at a tremendous pace. Just the energy consumption of China was crazy. Right. India was growing at a tremendous pace. We were importing a lot of oil. The world was growing incredibly. All corners of the world, and that's partly because yes, we had excess liquidity, sloshing in the markets, and there's generally buoyancy. So therefore, you're not panicking at that point of time. Whereas now,
it's shortage. It's because of shortage.
Yeah, right. It's a supply crisis, right? There's a shortage. There's a real shortage of it. And there is kind of, growth is going down. Everybody is fearing potential stagflationary situations where you have low growth and high inflation. So that, I think, is what explains the panic at this point of time.
Right. Final question before we thank you.
I had one question.
Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
You mentioned that it's good for India for decartelization when it comes to oil. I read this tweet by Nitin Pai also, who said that in general he feels that it's good if there isn't a cartel, and OPEC objects to the word cartel used for them. So why is that? Why is it that this could be good for us, and in the current circumstances, can we expect some relief?
As long as, in general economic terms, as long as you're overly dependent on any one supplier, that's always going to be bad, right? Because now they have complete pricing power. They can price as much as they want. Sometimes, there could be other geopolitical developments over which you have no control, and they could use price as a tool of economic statecraft. They could use price as a leveraging tool, whole bunch of things. But as long as you have options, that's always better. Now, for quite some time, we had a few options. We had options in terms of Russia, in terms of Iran, of course, the Middle East itself, the entire OPEC countries. So these were at least different sets of options that we had. Now, for all practical purpose, Iran is no longer an option. Russia, we can import it one day. We are given permission to import one day, not another. So, that's always kind of, it's going to be fraught. And so... which means that we are going to be overly reliant on OPEC and its decisions, right? And so either it's done deliberately, or it could be because of external events such as this. You're now going to be overly exposed to one energy source, and that's never generally a good idea. So purely in that terms, I think just the breaking of the cartel a grouping is always good for us, right? Now, you have at least slightly more options. Maybe you can get a long-term deal with one of the countries and say, okay, with UAE and say, can you supply to us at this particular rate? And that could then force OPEC to sign deals. We don't know, but it's generally more options, the better it is. If again you will allow me, I want to talk about one other thing, which is we speak about this external cartelization, but I think it's equally important to talk about internal cartelization and how that leads to increase in prices as well. I don't know if you have the time for it.
Yes,
but
we do.
We have an oligopoly, right? We have just 3 players in the market that produce ATF and that supplies ATF to airports, which is IOC, Indian Oil Corporation, HPCL, and BPCL. Those are the only 3 players, and they have enormous pricing power. So they are government owned. So I see this kind of absurdity played out, right? On one hand, you have the government owned players, which is these 3 of them, which benefit from that increased crack spread. But at the same time, so that's one side of the equation. On the other side, the government taxes the very set of players who are at the receiving end of this kind of oligopolistic behavior, right? So on both ends, I think airlines. I mean, I understand if a lot of people don't have a lot of sympathy for airlines, but they are being squeezed from every single direction.
Yeah, it's a very tough business to run anyway.
Yeah, and the problem with the state-owned companies and their and their kind of oligopoly is this, right? Now, one of the estimates says that their margins are up to 21%. This is a slightly older margin. I have to put all of the caveats. Right now, they're not even disclosing it, which for me, that itself is a red flag. But there's no recent figures. But as of 2008, 2009, the margin is 21%. That's not a small number, right? And there's coordinated kind of price mechanism. So all 3 of them will revise their prices on the 1st of every month and the 16th of every month, which again acts like a cartel. It's exactly like OPEC, right? And the final bit, you don't have any private players. So airlines have zero negotiating powers. It's not like they can say, okay, if you don't supply to me at a price.
How come Reliance hasn't gone into this game? Yeah, they should get into it immediately. They'll shut down the other 3.
They're not allowed. Oh, once I actually want Reliance in.
Mukesh bhai, you're not allowed. Mukesh bhai, ye kaise ho gaya?
Right, so I think that is a problem. That is a problem where you have a very tightly knit thing. So we need privatization there. You need to allow for private players in this OMC business. And again, I'm sorry, now I'm going on another tangent, but the reason why OMCs, I mean, it's also now easy to look at them as the villains, but the reason why OMC charges higher at ATF is because they're being squeezed elsewhere. Because there are election time and the government does not want to pass on higher fuel costs to consumers, they're keeping the price of petrol and diesel steady. They're not passing it on to consumers, which means that right now, for example, every one of those OMCs are losing about 14 rupees per litre on petrol and 18 rupees per litre on diesel and something else on LPG. Right now, they have to recover that elsewhere. Where do they recover it from? From supposedly the luxury good, which is flying and airlines. So that's the cross-subsidization and compensation that is happening.
Wow, so well simplified, Anupam. I hope that was of value to our audience. I know it was of great value to me. But since most newsrooms are run by juvenile men like me, I've thought of a headline that you can use. You're welcome. Airline industries take off hit by skid marks due to crack spread. You're welcome.
God.
Okay. So on that note,
Terrible.
On that note, Anupam, your recommendation for the week before we say goodbye.
I normally drown myself in non-fiction all the time, but for a change, after maybe 10 to 15 years, I picked up a fictional book. It's called Whispers in the Mist. It's a set of stories in Darjeeling, and I go to Darjeeling every year or so. So
why?
I just want to pick stories from that. It's by an author called Prerna Devan.
So why do you go to Darjeeling every year? Sorry, I have no
my
business
wife's from there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Lovely.
So no, because I had shot the most expensive tea tasting over there. And I remember there was this gentleman, we went to this tea tasting. He was saying that the tea has to be tasted at such and such time when the sun is like this so that it reflects off. And then you're supposed to do sudu, you're supposed to like taste tea like so that air goes in with it.
Oh.
And then he had all these teas lined up.
Really?
And he said, okay, now start tasting. And in the lab coats. Now I started tasting, they all fucking tasted the same to me. But when you get pressured into saying, yeah, this Makai Bari, which is 15,000 rupees a kilo, so very, very nice. As this one is 2,000 is not so nice. I could not tell.
Has earthly aftertones and whatnot.
I kept nodding. But since you picked up fiction before, we thank you. because that's one of my recommendations today. There's this podcast of The Devil Wears Prada Economics. Like Devil Wears Prada Part 2 is out, and NPR's Planet Money, the economics podcast, has compared the price of the Prada products of Devil
Yeah.
Wears Prada
Versus
1
now.
versus 2, and even Piketty did that in his I don't know which book, where he compared Jane Austen's that man was of handsome, of good disposition with prospects of whatever 100,000 pounds estate. He was basically calculating what was considered rich in Jane Austen's time. So it was an economic indicator based on fiction of the time. Is there
Right,
any
right.
possibility of Indian fiction being used for that, or is Indian fiction just shit, which is like cannot be used for anything
No,
of
you can't
consequence
say Indian
economic?
fiction is shit. How
No,
can you
I'm
such a
just
rich
I'm just saying that.
tradition of
Is there any, like, suppose an economist like Anupam said, okay, let me pick up fiction from the 1900s and compare it to fiction of 2010, and that will tell me what was considered rich then, what is considered rich now.
I think we can do that. I think there's enough material, and especially now, if you run it through an LLM, I'm sure we should be able to do something interesting like that.
Okay.
I've
Idea
not tried
for.
it, but yeah.
But thanks so much, Anupam. Have a good weekend, and thank you so much for your time and expertise. It was of great value to us and our subscribers too, I'm sure.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.